One of the best animated short films I have ever seen only lasted for about 3 minutes. Allow me to show you a frame from Puparia, an artistical abstract animation from the mind of Shingo Tamagawa, which on first impression would likely arrest your attention, until you look away about 3 minutes later. In a documentary that explains the method behind the animation, the artist sheds light on his journey. The art, which he had admired since he was a child, within a span of 5 years in the industry, had consumed the very core of his existence. A break was necessary.
本当に限界だなとその頃に感じて、一回もう全部ゼロにしなきゃダメだなと。
But the post-burnout break would inspire an idea. From the thought of starting anew would spark the concept of Puparia, a state resembling that of a pupa, perhaps the mind of an artist stuck in between two places.
媒体で直接的に焼き付けれたらなと思って、それに対して自分でかけてみようかなと思って。
But the task was never easy. 3 years of tireless work for 3 minutes worth of animation. And as he explains the workflow,
それに圧倒的な時間を取られたのはやっぱり一人でやることの本当の限界だなとは思いました。
slowly digesting this daunting project, spending days upon days simply to scan his drawings all by himself, you finally understand the value of this art. It is here when you feel compassion for the artist. The more you consume art, the more the art will consume you. For the ordinary person, perhaps just a contradiction, but in the mind of a creator, an unsettling notion. What is the real cost of art to its creator? I was walking along the road with 2 friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly, the sky turned blood red. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue-black fjord and the city. My friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety, and I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature. These were the words the Norwegian painter Edvard Munch used to describe his masterpiece, The Scream. A painting that may hold many interpretations, but often highlights an intense emotion that the artist struggled with throughout his life: anxiety. Edvard Munch is what the modern world will call a tortured artist. Someone who struggles to find true purpose but persists through consuming art until the mind consumes their existence. In a way, it is a sad life. On reflection, it would feel as if every stroke of brush on that canvas had meaning. Perhaps a way to get into their psyche, perhaps a cry for help. And this leads me to wonder, were these artists compelled by their tortured minds to be creative, to endlessly create and ignore their volitions? Perhaps it's hard to tell. Perhaps the truth lies elsewhere. Perhaps the art was the getaway, an escapism which they desperately coveted to free themselves of their stifling psyche. But regardless, we're glad that they put brush to canvas, for else the world would be devoid of art such as these. Art is a time machine. Perhaps these paintings are like snapshots of the artist's mind at a given point in their lives. And this does beg the question, would the world have known about Edvard Munch if he had not painted? Would we have known about the tortured soul he was if it weren't for his emotional paintings? Would we have had compassion for this artist? It is kind of a bizarre world to exist in where validation determines the sympathy to a human. But this is applied in the most intense form in the world of the creative. How many artists did we lose to the passage of time simply through a lack of recognition? Much less, how many have we forgotten simply because of a lack of valuation? Perhaps the most infamous and extreme case of such a thought process leads to creative geniuses like Vincent van Gogh. The mind tormented Van Gogh throughout his life, struggling with all kinds of mental disabilities, and it would seem that art was the only answer to the swirling thoughts in his mind. Wrapping your mind around the importance of Van Gogh to modern society isn't that difficult. In fact, the landscape of art would have been much different without the existence of this one man. But on the crossroad between art and humanity, one could wonder, when people glance at the marvel of a painting like The Starry Night, perhaps one of the most recognizable paintings in the world, do they simply consume the marvel of the art, or would they ever spare a thought for the spiraling mind of its creator? Of course they would, right? In fact, it might even be part of that catalog. Speaking of catalogs, did you know that in a period of around 10 years, Van Gogh had painted more than 900 paintings? If so, would it have crossed our minds to know where they were or what they are or what exactly they represent? Just like the awe-inspiring work that was The Starry Night. Well, this seems to be the plight of this argument. Maybe it's a me problem that I only know so little about Van Gogh's paintings, and perhaps it would be of great service to post-impressionist art if we were all to plop down on the couch and learn about these paintings one by one, granting them the validation they rightfully deserve. But history would have you believe something unjust beyond the extent of our control. The fact of the matter remains that if it weren't for Jo Van Gogh Bonger, Van Gogh's sister-in-law, it is quite plausible that the world would have been robbed of one of its greatest painters. After she had endured the sorrow of an unfortunate tragedy, it was herself who felt the need to remember the legacy of Van Gogh. It is she who felt compassion for the artist. And such is the world of art. The marketing is perhaps what raises the demand. The demand elevates the value, and that value eventually gives it that validation. And I get it. The world back then was so much different. Countless decades of inflation can run up the prices of these paintings exponentially. But am I the only one who feels some type of way when a painting like Irises, something that an artist had created while being in an asylum, turns out to be at some point the most expensive painting in the world, fetching a whopping $53 million in the art market? Is this exactly compassion? I'm not so sure. But hey, at least with that kind of exposure, the ordinary mind can feel the emotions of such an art piece, to sympathize with the artist even after all these years. Perhaps after all, it is not the art, it might just be the nature of this industry. I don't really call myself an artist, although there was a point in my life not too long ago when I used to do paid commissions, and there isn't a specific reason why I stopped doing it. I just sort of fell out of love with it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that doing art as a job can be demanding on the mind. And that's why I do it as a hobby now. It is more fun, and there doesn't seem to be any validation that needs to be sought. It feels like the byproduct of a natural process of the creative mind. But of course, I do have an option here. But what about the artists who are forced to create? For it is their job to entertain us. What about the artists who work in the field of entertainment? As much as it is hard to believe, creativity cannot be an industry, but in a vastly organized world where consumerism is rampant, it is hard to not see it as such. I started off this video by stating the discontent of an artist in the animation industry, but perhaps it is a play on words. Maybe after all, he was not alluding to the art. Perhaps it is the industry that consumes the artists. This tweet, which was online only for about 15 minutes, sheds light upon an already degenerate industry. This was no aspiring artist letting his frustration show. No, these were the words of an animator working on Jujutsu Kaisen under the contract of MAPPA Studio. Delving into this topic makes you realize that this is not a one-off incident. It is only the tip of the iceberg. And if there's anything that the world has taught us from the personalized stories from the past, it is that the industry hasn't changed a whole lot even now. Art is of course booming, but its artists are in a state of perpetual torture. The state of the anime industry is not something that raises eyebrows anymore. It is all too common, something that is hard to accept, but the bitter truth regardless. And studies on this topic has unveiled under its spotlight a system that constantly violates the integrity of artists.
I know a lot of animators whose bodies can't cope with this lifestyle. They're forced to quit.
Out of the 323 respondents of a survey, it was found that about 71% of these workers average more than 8 hours per day, while another 30% pushing 10 hours. Workers in animation seem to be working about 57 more hours than the national monthly average, which, if you are wondering, even for the extremely dedicated Japanese work culture, is a bit too much.
Man, I quit. You quit? I'm done. Yes, I quit. I'm tired of this. What? No, I'm done. You done? I'm done wasting time. I'm about to get started. Oh, you done wasting time? Right now.
And the funny thing is, based on the things that I read upon researching the topic, these scenarios can't be that far-fetched from reality. There were scandals regarding some of the allegedly outrageous contracts and terms that silenced his workers from complaining. But all the while, the rabbit hole goes down further. For all the dire nature of work life, some of these artists don't even get appropriate compensation for their hard work. The same survey revealed that a portion of these animators make about $1,000 less than the national monthly median salary. But still, it would seem that the artists always keep coming back. The growing popularity of anime across the world would obviously overlap with this trend. And to ask the question why would be to question the passion of the creative mind. People keep coming back because they love their craft, because they are cursed by creativity. But it is the industry that takes advantage of this passion. To them, the craft is only profit, but the artist is indeed malleable. However, such wild tendencies of the corporate side of art seems to be a universal trait. It was only recently that we learned about the production nightmare behind everyone's favorite darling, the Spider-Verse.
It is impressive how common this is. Even for something like Across the Spider-Verse, which everyone championed for, good, real artist relations and everything.
During the production of the much-awaited sequel, it was reported that about 100 artists had to quit, not being able to stick with the arduous revisionism the project entailed. And when you see the end product, you witness the extent of this craftsmanship. It was a visual spectacle, something that everyone praised to be beyond their expectations. But behind the veil, even if the struggles were numbered to be only the few, did we really give these artists the credit they deserved? Probably not. And look, I'm not saying that people have to boycott these visual masterpieces for the sake of having a clear conscience. I personally don't feel as if I could make myself stop from enjoying the artistry within this industry. But to simply acknowledge the hard work of the people who actually deserve the plaudits, that much I feel responsible for. Even if it is that much, I should have sympathy for these artists. But of course, when something looks terrible, it is the fault of the artist, isn't it? As I've said before, the commercialization of art does offer quite a few benefits to its artists, but amidst the incentives and exposure, which is a pretty cool deal to be honest, when push comes to shove, it also offers the same artist the short end of the stick.
Including Rhythm and Hughes. Sadly, Rhythm and Hughes is suffering severe financial difficulties right now. I urge you all to remember. Including Rhythm and Hughes.
This was the Academy cutting off the audio of the VFX team from Life of Pi, incidentally playing the music from Jaws over their speech. What's interesting about this situation was the overlapping protests taking place outside the venue from about 500 or so VFX workers on account of the bankruptcy of Rhythm and Hughes. Once a giant studio brought to its knees after their business model had drastically failed. Although it's difficult to point fingers and assign blame in the right directions, it's the lack of acknowledgement of such cases by the industry that completely baffles my mind. Within a decade from 2003 to 2013, about 21 VFX companies had closed down or filed for bankruptcy. Forget about sympathy in this scenario, it's more of a career-ending sequence of events we are talking about here. The predicament is a win-less condition. No one really goes out of their way to commend the artists for their incredible work in a film, but nonetheless, when something looks off about a certain visual, no one experiences the full force of the audience's wrath more than the artists. And I think you can't blame the general public for what is indeed valid criticism. We are consumers. It's part of our job to make sure that the entertainment that we pay for meets a certain standard. It's not that crazy to have such expectations. And this is where the part of the blame does fall on the people calling the shots.
Does that look real?
In that particular shot, no, actually. It doesn't really, right? When you look close.
It need to be more blue.
I mean, what exactly was he trying to point out here? It just comes off as the director trying to undermine the work of the people who worked for him. Maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was some kind of self-deprecating humor. But if anything, if he really thought that it looks bad, should it not be his fault also? And this is where the detachment between the industry and its artists are put under the spotlight once again. Just like the situation involving Rhythm and Hughes, it's the failure of these massive companies like Disney to simply concede that there is a problem with the structure that never ceases to amaze me. We're not sleeping anymore. We haven't seen our families. We're working every weekend. This was what a VFX artist had to say about the working conditions at Marvel. Another one alluded to what us, the public, thinks of the matter. It definitely feels more like a conveyor belt nowadays than necessarily each project being given its own thought and time. And when you are constrained by time limits, how plausible exactly is it for an artist to be creative? And I get it. It's a job and there are requirements to be met. But when you're turning a 90-minute movie into a 10-hour feature, basically you're doing 10 times the amount of work within the same or even sometimes a shorter period of time, as another artist points out.
You just work every single day. Every 21st day, editorial will get a day off because they have union rights. And every 21st day, we continue working with no editorial team. And it is the most heartbreaking feeling in the world because you know that another 3 weeks has passed and you're still working and you have no idea what day it is.
And when you swoop into this topic from a rather different perspective than the norm, you'll come across endless articles shedding light upon the plight of the average artist in entertainment. It isn't so easy to be an artist anymore. When the artist jumps into the methodical side of modern societies, they are also a cog in the machine, churning out mindless pieces of art without the creative fulfillment that an artist desperately desires. And this breaks some of them. The creative mind is a hazy unknown, riddled with ideas and concepts of many meanings. But sometimes when the levee breaks, ideas collide. And for some, the subliminal takes control of the self. Things like depression and loneliness are often the contents of the mind of a troubled artist. And just like how Edvard Munch or Van Gogh's paintings depict the spiraling thoughts inside their troubled psyche, the modern artist is troubled perhaps a little more, for art is an industry even more to the mechanized world. And I think anime is perhaps one of those mediums that fully embrace such adult subjects that are often overlooked by other forms of animation. And thus, it is at this conjunction of philosophy and art where the mind unravels its troubles through the medium. And for me, something that represents this misery of modern day artists are the scenes from a series like Evangelion. The many interpretations of Evangelion is a discussion that proves to be a bottomless pit. It means different things for the people who consume it, but to not dissect and hyper-analyze the story is like expecting not to get wet in the rain without an umbrella. Practically impossible. But from the artistic perspective, there seems to be this objective reality that often conveys or runs parallel to the story. Evangelion is in a way the plight of Hideaki Anno's life, the misery of the modern day artist. The many scenes of Evangelion proves to be a self-reflection of its creator. Just like how one could glance at the starry night and wonder about the swirling mind of its designer, in the modern day, Evangelion offers a similar experience into the inner psyche of a depressed artist. Wanting the characters and plot to change into something optimistic, but swallowed by this unyielding presence of emptiness, devouring its characters and in turn, its creator. In a statement he gave in 1995, Anno described this very thing. I try to include everything of myself in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Myself, a broken man who could do nothing for 4 years. A man who ran away for 4 years. One who was simply not dead. Then one thought, you can't run away, came to me, and I restarted this production. It is a production where my only thought was to burn my feelings into the film. It is no secret that Hideaki Anno was suffering from crippling depression during the making of Evangelion. But to an extent, what got him there were his previous projects. The production struggles within Gainax combined with the internal struggles of the self. It proved to be the breaking point of his mind. And his escape from this brutal reality was the fantasy of Evangelion. And in it, he reflects on this turbulent period in his life through the protagonist Shinji. Anno didn't want to run away anymore. He wanted to face his reality, just like how Shinji does at the end of the series. And I know there isn't enough evidence to suggest that creativity results in the breakdown of the mind. The stereotype of the tortured artist, as some experts say, is something more of an exception than the rule. However, the struggle of the artist in distinct environments that act more like production lines, well, here, the curse of creativity seems to be the real thing. Forcing people to create, it never sits well with the mind, and it is alongside this road where you meet people like Hideaki Anno. Evangelion is not an easy watch for the normal mind. It gets darker and tragic as it approaches its conclusion, but it never quite ends as you expect it to. This was an artist painting his own life struggles onto the canvas, making sense of his feelings and emotions in a state of severe depression. It doesn't really end for him. It is a solution, perhaps, but such is the state of mind that maybe for him, it doesn't have an ending. And all that we can do while watching it is to see it from the mind of its creator, to see it for what it is, to sympathize with its creative mind. But away from the individual, far from the reaches of the soul, the industry of art changes. It evolves into shapes and forms that cross the lines of comprehension. The question of whether or not AI is the future is now a thing of the present. It was only a few years ago when the best that an AI could do from a creative perspective was along the lines of a lazy scribble from a playful child. But fast forward a few years, perhaps the world of art has gone through its most terrifying transformation yet, and it seems to have taken a toll on its artists. The mind of the artist is further foiled by an impending catastrophe, or at least the world of art feels that way. It's like there's a predator in the forest. The silent despair feels perceptible. And it is here where we come to terms with the unethical industry of art once again. The commercialization of AI has implications that are far beyond the mind can sense. Would it not take over human tasks and render people jobless is perhaps the question of the century. But for a while, it felt like creativity was out of bounds for an algorithm. It felt safe and untouchable. But now, it seems to be the exact opposite. Creative AI tools have thrown a spanner in the works.
What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me?
What started off as a fun and questionably ethical way of generating wallpapers and goofy images for leisure has completely turned into a massive snowballing industry ready to replace the artists who they faithfully served all this while. And no company has had its reputation dragged through the mud in this day and age as much as Adobe. It's one thing to have random AI algorithms merging datasets of artworks without the permission of the respective creators. But it is sort of beyond the ordinary when a company like Adobe exhibits such sketchy behavior. This was a tweet from Loish, one of the biggest digital artists out there, claiming that her name was being allowed to be used by Adobe in their AI-generated stock photos. And it seems like the outrage isn't going away, not by a long shot. Adobe seems to be evolving in ways that continue to hurt the well-being of the average artist. It was only recently they got exposed for allegedly using user-generated content for training their AI models, and in turn using vague wording within their terms and conditions to evade legal consequences.
We need to give money to pieces of software that treat people like human beings, not software that treats you like this. Why do you get to have access to every single thing that I've worked on, to have a machine learning algorithm go through it, to improve your products and services, when for all I know in 1 year your products and services may compete with mine?
Look, the theft of art has existed for the longest time, but when it comes from the hands that offer you the tools, it becomes more than just stealing. It meanders into the realms of manipulation. And going around the internet would render countless incidents of such nature, fashioned by companies like Adobe, squeezing the life out of these artists. Websites that used to be dedicated to artists, curated by artists, now seem like an artistic dystopia, filled with algorithmic artworks as far as the eyes can see. And no matter how you perceive this phenomenon, no matter how you feel about AI art, when you see the styles of these artists emulated through artificial algorithms, do we even care about what the art really meant? Do we really feel sympathy for the artist? But perhaps when the fog settles, it is not all doom and gloom. When you are fair and objective to the efforts of the creator, when you show compassion to the artist, the world of art does seem to be a promised place that has always been. Amidst the mistreatment of artists in this industry, there are also studios that are willing to go the other way, to acknowledge the artists for their hard work, to provide a better work environment in the process. In the world of anime, where there is a clear disparity between its studios and artists, studios like Kyoto Animation, responsible for visually captivating works like Violet Evergarden and A Silent Voice, are a beacon of hope in treating the artists as thoughtful beings rather than robots. Here, the artists are offered flexible schedules, where no one is overworked, and for their effort, neither are they underpaid. It's quite rare for a mission statement from an animation studio to apply to itself in its essence, but keep a corporate as a humanitarian one is perhaps the best way to describe them in a nutshell. It is beyond tragic what had happened to a studio like Kyoto Animation.
Now to that breaking news overseas, a suspected arsonist setting off a deadly fire at an animation studio in Kyoto, killing dozens of people.
To lose creative souls, human beings, artists who were responsible for incredible works of art, to something so cruel. But to learn that this studio is recovering, for now, at least in their operations, it does shed light on the impact that they have had on the industry. Compassion for the artist is the overarching feeling that conveys the legacy of the studio. And given the resources and time, art does prevail. With enough wiggle room, the mind can conjure art that has meaning. It can portray novelty beyond the structured, industrialized art that we complain about on a regular basis. And it is perhaps here that we celebrate art from the unconstrained mind. Independent art is one of my favorite things to experience on the internet. It is truly where the soul of the artist is painted in its purest form. And as I recall correctly, it was on one of these random scrolls on my screen on a late sleepless night when I came across such beautiful indie animation as Puparia. It was a refreshing change for my mind, what really felt like a break from the routine. The intricacies and abstraction that an artist can portray through taking their own time and doing it their own way, it sort of blew me away. And as I began to process it further, I too felt this urge to consume more of such art. And through my compassion, in a way, I too felt this need to be creative. Independent art is perhaps not the easiest thing to discover. It isn't really marketed. More often than not, you stumble upon it. And when you scroll away on a sleepless night into the artistic rabbit hole of the internet, you'll be welcomed by strange and wondrous artistic expressions that you dare seek from the industry. I remember watching animated short films on YouTube, which made me realize that the novelty of art was alive and well. Unlike what Hollywood conveys, there is a whole different world of art that you probably haven't even come across yet. I remember watching this animated short called Cat City for the first time and being astounded by how different it seemed from mainstream animation.
Can I work here?
Sure.
Thanks.
In a matter of 3 minutes, it made me want to watch more of what this artist had to offer. In an appearance online, Vion, the creator of Cat City, broke down her creative process. And watching how someone could create captivating pieces of art from within the comfort of their own home, it just felt visceral and real, as if that's what art is meant to be about. There is a level of groundedness that comes with independent creators that is hard to pinpoint in a large-scale production crew. Here, it feels more to relate. It becomes easier to show compassion to the artist. There's not much room for a company to steal the ideas of an unrestrained creative mind. Its novelty blatantly floats on the sea of art to even resonate on a philosophical level. And surely, you must have come across such narratives floating around on social media. A short film called Happiness by Steve Cutts delves into a side of animation that made me contemplate. Death and the Winemaker was another that I stumbled upon, which opened my eyes to new possibilities in animation. And long before the release of the hit show Scavenger's Reign, which I raved about in one of my previous videos, even it had had its humble beginning as an animated short on YouTube. And the point that I'm trying to make here falls right into the bracket of creative control and what art can be when you give it time to mature. It's simply out of nature for a big production to even ponder such a long drawn-out plan for a 20-minute episode. So cutting corners to end up with something half decent is kind of the normality. Perhaps not just in animation, but just in general, it seems. And maybe that's why I feel the urge to show sympathy to the people who actually question the status quo. In a world where even something as original as creativity seems to be mechanized, sympathizing and supporting its artists just seems like the most plausible thing to do, to retain what human emotions feel like to be interpreted by humans rather than industries. But even within mechanization, it seems like when you show compassion, art can thrive in such environments too. I am no different than the average consumer when it comes to art. I would expect the second season of a series to come out right after season 1 had just finished, despite the impossibility of such a wish. I was so enthralled by the animation in the first season of Love, Death and Robots that I could not wait for the next season to commence. But based on the events that unfolded in 2020, it took some time for Season 2 to come out, and another year for Season 3. And as we sit here, almost 6 years into the series, Season 4 is yet to arrive. But as a consumer, I find myself satisfied with the decision, because for one, I know that the wait will be worth my time. It is one of those rare animated shows that doesn't diminish in quality over the seasons. The standard of art is visually perceptible. I was blown away by the unique stylization of the stories when I watched it the first time, and 3 seasons in, the stylistic choices are yet to disappoint me. In this series, the stars are truly the artists. There are no merchandisable characters or star-studded voice acting. It is plainly about artists and studios from across the globe coming together to push the boundaries of art. And when you delve into the anthology, you can feel how it shapes up to be a portfolio of art, displaying different styles and techniques with every passing episode. It is visibly obvious that a majority of creative control for the show vests in the hands of the artists. From the quality of the animation alone, you can tell that nothing is rushed or skimmed. There's a well laid out vetting process that ensures only the best of the best makes it. And the end result is an array of gorgeous animation, ranging from experimental to photorealistic and to all-out outlandish. And the truth is, I can't imagine someone watching a show like Love, Death and Robots and praising something more than the art. And that, in and of itself, is something rare in the industry. To be in tune with the story alongside the art, shows such as this, it proves that people care, that there is indeed sympathy for the artist. And this kinda takes us all the way back to Puparia. A feeling of progression is where the meaning meets the art. Change is the fundamental nature to life, and all things abide by it. So, no matter what happens though, I think art will keep evolving. Maybe now, this evolution is shaping the world through artificial algorithms, and perhaps in the future, art will be as simple as a projection of thought copied and pasted onto a canvas. But even in this unthinkably advanced future, the creative mind will always find reasons to create. Such is the will of the artist. But we gotta remember that they too are human. They aren't machines that are programmed to fulfill the wishes of our stimulable senses. They too can feel the pressure of a deadline closing in on them. But given the time and freedom, the mind of the artist is the land of the infinite. They can inspire the average human on a profound level that can't be attained through other aspects of life. And if this is why the mind of an artist is a sanctum for the society, then it is perhaps why we should have sympathy for the artist. And I really haven't done this in a while, but if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a like, and if you want to watch more of such content, maybe consider subscribing as well. And yeah, that's just about it, and I'll see you in the next video.